At the beginning of the year, I recorded a nearly 1 hour long tier list ranking of all the doctors. Now, as you can tell by the description of that length, it was not very brief, and in turn, it was rather bland. It also just didn't feel like the right time, but now with Jodie Whittaker's departure and David Tennant's return on the horizon, I thought it best for me to finally put that ranking up on YouTube. Well, here goes nothing, I guess. Just to explain how this ranking is going to work, first off, it will be my least favorite doctors to my favorite doctors in order. And just to preface my rankings, my rankings have no mark on the actors or the performances that these actors give at all. This is purely how I feel about these doctors and just where they sit with me. In last place is Jo Martin's Fugitive Doctor, simply on the basis that we just haven't seen much from her. While I think her portrayal brings a certain confidence and clarity to a pre-Doctor, I just don't believe that we have enough screen time to justify her having a higher position on my list. I love the certain flair that the Fugitive Doctor brings to the role, and I do not doubt that Jo Martin is capable of great things in the role of the Doctor. However, her marvelous job is undercut by the whole Timeless Child debacle and how that's fared with fans, and her sort of ghost status outside the Jodie Whittaker era. I believe Jo Martin deserves her own sort of spin-off series so we can explore the origins and purpose of the Fugitive Doctor in a much more controlled environment, and it would allow a lot more fans who are sort of skeptical about the Fugitive Doctor to come to appreciate the character a lot more. Now, my second last place is hugely controversial. It is the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton. It is controversial in that the second Doctor is universally beloved by both old and new classic Who fans alike. But for me, having only experienced the power of the Daleks and the reconstructed web of fear, the second Doctor just lacks that sort of charm and familiarity that I have with a lot of the other Doctors. However, that is not to say that Patrick Troughton had a bad performance in any way or any stretch of the imagination. This man was the blueprint for the Doctors that were to come for the next 60 years. He laid the groundworks for who the Doctor would become. And for that, I think the second Doctor himself gives the reason for his ranking here on my list the best.
Well, I wish I could give you a precise answer. Perhaps the best way to describe it is a sort of formless, shapeless thing.
Next up is the War Doctor, and now, I love John Hurt's portrayal of the War Doctor. I actually believe no other actor could have nailed the role quite like how John Hurt did. The War Doctor was dark and gritty, very much the embodiment of the Doctor's struggled past, but he could also be fun and charismatic when he had to be. This naturally made me love the War Doctor, and I still do to this day. However, this is another case of the Fugitive Doctor. We just don't get enough screen time of the War Doctor. And although that can no longer be helped, rest in peace John Hurt, it's just a shame, because I think the War Doctor was a brilliant incarnation, and having him a feature of Day of the Doctor really just gave such emphasis to the Doctor's shady past, which was accentuated by Paul McGann's Night of the Doctor short. 10th place is just as controversial, if not more, than Patrick Troughton, because it is the third Doctor, Jon Pertwee. Jon Pertwee is so many people's Doctor. You know, the Doctor you grew up with, or you were first introduced to, or just the Doctor that speaks to you the most. This is so many people's Doctor. He's even the Doctor's Doctor. Thus, you can imagine how painful it is for me to have to rank such a popular Doctor as Jon Pertwee so low down on my list. And I say have to with stress, because the only third Doctor story I have seen is The Claws of Axos, which, mind you, I absolutely love. Like, I love it to death. But it's just not enough third Doctor for me to make a informed decision as to just how much the third Doctor speaks to me. The way I explain that is very poor, but I think you get what I'm saying. You really thought I was gonna let 13 slide away, didn't you? Of course not. The 13th Doctor is next. Now, juxtaposed to much of the Doctor Who fandom, I don't completely hate on and shit on the 13th Doctor's era at every chance I get. You see, I'm a Doctor Who fan, so I am not averse to reaching into that haystack to find the needle, or to searching for diamonds in the rough. Basically, I can appreciate a lot of the 13th Doctor's era, and a lot of that comes down to Jodie Whittaker's performance itself. I believe Jodie did a fantastic job with the script she was handed, and I also firmly believe that the hate wagon brought upon her as being a terrible actress is unfounded and frankly unfair. Look, I'm not a fan of the Chibnallisms that invaded Doctor Who for the past 4 years, but Chibnall's reign of power has been and gone, so let's just breathe a little, yeah? I will argue to the ends of the earth that I believe the 13th Doctor was not the bane of Doctor Who, and if you hate me for that, well then, move on. I just know this one is going to come back to bite me on the ass. The first Doctor, William Hartnell, is next on my list. You know, the man that started it all? The man that is responsible for the creation of Doctor Who as it is. Well, apart from Waris Hussein, Sidney Newman, and the rest of the higher-ups behind the inception of Doctor Who. But the problem is, the first Doctor is an icon. He's probably not the first face you think of when you hear Doctor Who, but he is so recognizable as being the face that started it all, that it's just painful to have to say that he's this low down on my list. Many people still fondly remember William Hartnell's time as the Doctor, be it from their childhood or belated broadcasts. And thanks to the Moffat-Capaldi swan song, Twice Upon a Time, a modern audience has also fallen in love with the First Doctor, even if specifically David Bradley's portrayal of the First Doctor. But being born just before the New Who revival, I don't have those memories, and so alongside the fact that I just don't genuinely enjoy the First Doctor's era, I can't justify ranking him any higher on the list. The next one was tight. It was either between Colin Baker or Paul McGann, the 6th and 8th Doctors, respectively. I ultimately settled on the 6th Doctor for no other reason than that I love Paul McGann's portrayal of the Doctor, and I think he deserves his own series. But more on that later. Colin Baker is not a bad Doctor, let me say that. I love Revelation of the Daleks, I love the entirety of Trial of a Time Lord, but I just love Paul McGann's 8th Doctor a whole lot more. It is genuinely no stain on Colin Baker or the 6th Doctor. I love the 6th Doctor, and it's just a matter of the positioning here. Personally, I genuinely have no negatives about the 6th Doctor, and in fact, I give him so much leeway from his costume alone. I love the 6th Doctor's costuming, let it be known. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Do I really need to announce this one after what I just said? Very well. It's Paul McGann, the 8th Doctor. I know. Big surprise. A little bit of reasoning for this position though. On a recent rewatch of the Doctor Who 1996 TV movie, I realized I actually don't hold any grudges against Paul McGann for the abomination that is the movie in general. You can't blame the actor for a bad script, and I think Paul McGann deserves more than just the Night of the Doctor to make up for what the movie stole from him. So I've just realized that up until now, I've made a grave mistake in the numbering system. I mustn't have accounted for the War Doctor because these numbers were completely wrong, so I apologize for the voiceovers now being completely unrelated to the numbers being displayed on the screen. Onward. Braveheart, the 5th Doctor. Yes, that is who is next. A fan favorite Doctor. Cricket Doctor. The 5th. Peter Davison is perhaps one of the greatest faces of classic Who, in my opinion. From his costuming, to his interactions, to his companions, to his adventures, I think the 5th Doctor just really embodies what the Doctor stands for. And that is a certain inquisitiveness, yet a simultaneous foreboding charisma that almost borders on stupid. That's not to say that Peter Davison is stupid, or I don't know, maybe he is, but he just brought that playfulness to the Doctor that I think is really innate to the character. The 11th Doctor is one of the most recognizable faces of the Doctor in the modern age. Today, the youngest actor to play the Doctor, a whole 3 years younger than Peter Davison, who was the youngest actor to play the Doctor before Smith. The 11th Doctor's time as the Doctor is full of stories that are emotional, interesting and adventurous, and just downright enjoyable. And averse to much of the fan base, or at least I believe, I found that I actually genuinely love Series 6 and 7, regardless of the reputation they have. Matt Smith's Doctor does a perfect job of portraying an old man in a young man's body, and it's just full of some great monsters and creatures, and some stories that I think just only work with the 11th Doctor. Such as the frankly marvelous Vincent and the Doctor, which was repeatedly played on end when I was a little bit older as a kid in school. Christopher Eccleston, the face that began the revival of Doctor Who in 2005. There's a lot of sentimental value I attach to Chris Eccleston's Doctor. Being the first Doctor that I was probably introduced to, the 9th Doctor's time was full of interesting villains and some crazy stories like The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances, which scared me to death as a young kid for a significant amount of time, just like the peg dolls in Night Terrors. But to me, the 9th Doctor's time is filled with some of the best stories that we've had in New Who to date, and I stand by that firmly to this day. Without the amazing performance of Christopher Eccleston and the great work from Russell T Davies and the team, we wouldn't have got some of the stories and the characters that have defined the entire experience of not one, not two, but possibly even 3 generations of Doctor Who viewers. I think that any way you spin it, the 9th Doctor was truly
fantastic! 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 Fantastic!
When you think of Tom Baker, the 4th Doctor, you usually think of the Doctor. After all, he is the Doctor. And I concur in this exact thinking. Tom Baker is one of my favorite incarnations of the Doctor, and that will never change. His stories are just superb. He embodies the very essence of the Doctor, and whenever he's on screen, you just can't help but be delighted and revel in the fact that this is the Doctor. And frankly, there is no better way I can explain that. It's just like David Tennant for most people. And just like the 10th Doctor, the 4th Doctor's time is filled with some of my favorite stories of Doctor Who in its entirety, from the Pyramids of Mars to the Ark in Space to the Genesis of the Daleks. All of these stories are just what makes Doctor Who, and not just classic Doctor Who, but Doctor Who itself to me. But while I have all these thoughts on the 4th Doctor, he is only owed the 4th position on this list, because you will momentarily see just how much I love these next coming Doctors. I'm sorry, Tom Baker, but this is how it is. I've had to export the video and then throw it back onto another timeline and add onto it, so I'm going to try and make this one short and snappy. I'm bending the rules here because these next 2 Doctors are just on the same level to me. Essentially, there is no 3rd position, so let's just get on over to the 2nd and 1st. The 2 Doctors that drew were Peter Capaldi and David Tennant, the 12th and 10th Doctors respectively. Tennant is the Doctor that I grew up with, and Capaldi is the Doctor that I also wish I grew up with, if that makes sense. Their eras are both filled with magical stories that are just absolutely breathtaking. They have this great flair and vibrancy, and they both embody what the Doctor is to me, that curiosity and intelligence, yet that all-encompassing darkness and very subtle shades of grey in an otherwise colourful palette. They're not very alike. Tennant is a very human Doctor, whereas Capaldi is a much more reclusive and alien one. Yet I love them equally, and it was so incredibly difficult to try and rank them as either 3rd or 2nd, so I ended up just putting them together here. I have so much to say about these 2 Doctors, but I'm running out of time, and so I'm not going to explain my favorite stories or what I love about them necessarily individually, but I will do that in a future video, I swear, I promise. Of course, this leaves the King the first place as the 7th Doctor, Sylvester McCoy. Sylvester is the Doctor for me. When I said that earlier, not that he's the one that I grew up with or that I most identify with, but he is just the Doctor to me. He is the spitting image of everything that the Doctor stands for, is, and will be. He's theatrical, just like he was in his past, and that really shines and brings out a sort of duality in the Doctor, this sort of comedic clown energy that is also superseded at times by this darkness that forces him to push away those he loves, like Ace, and become more distant. He is the Doctor to me, and I will say that to the end of time. I love all of his stories, every single one of them. I am one of those crazy fans that absolutely adores Time in the Rani and Paradise Towers, and most of the completely controversial stories from the time and the fall of Doctor Who. But I don't know. There's just something about him. One could say it's ridiculous, but Sylvester McCoy is the Doctor to me. And that's that. Thank you so much for watching. This video was a mess, but I am going to improve the quality of the next few videos. I promise that as well. If you want more, please subscribe, like, and comment. I make Doctor Who content regularly, and I will see you next time. Alonzi.